Hi, guys, and welcome to another 7-minute lecture. We're looking at one of our universal debates today, something that's a topic of intense discussion and disagreement all over the world. Should we have the death penalty? As in, should we execute people if the crimes they commit happen to be horrible enough? In the interest of time, I'm simply going to be giving you a snapshot of what I think are some prominent arguments from both sides. Please keep that in mind, and please also note that this is not meant to be an exhaustive list of the pros and cons in this debate. With that disclaimer, let's get into the reasons why people say that the death penalty has no place in a civilized society. The first is the irreversible nature of capital punishment. That is, if we kill people for crimes they didn't commit, there would be nothing we can do for them if we find out later that they were innocent all along. Of course, the other side would say, listen, in that case, why even have a legal system? If we are going to operate on the premise that the person being punished might be innocent, then surely we should argue against the idea of punishment itself, since people can be wrongfully punished for both minor crimes and major crimes. Why even penalize people for crimes if we take that mindset? The difference, of course, is that while other punishments are also irreversible in the sense that the time itself cannot be undone, people argue that the victims can still be compensated in some way if it turns out that the punishment was wrongful. So if you and I go to jail for a murder we didn't commit, and it's discovered 10 years later that we were innocent, while it is true that those 10 years can never be returned, there can still be some kind of attempt made to compensate us for that. Whereas with the death penalty, even that basic action would be impossible. It would be a punishment for which we couldn't even have a preliminary conversation in terms of how we address injustice. And that brings me to the second point. Do we expect the government and the judiciary to be right in every single instance? The statistics and history both tell us very clearly that mistakes will always be made. This is not a negative reflection on those institutions. It's simply a fact of life that when human beings undertake a long-term task, particularly a complex one like justice, there will be mistakes that are made. And therefore, that fundamentally the nature of the death penalty is itself ignoring the nature of justice. For the death penalty to be a fair punishment, we need to work under the premise that no innocent people are ever sent to jail, something we clearly know doesn't happen in the real world. The third point I'd like to highlight here against capital punishment is on the basis of how we conceptualize human rights today. The current framework of rights and duties is based on a hierarchy of rights, the most important of which are known as fundamental human rights. And at the very top of this hierarchy is the right to life. In most legal circles today, that is considered the single most important right that a human being can enjoy. Something inalienable that people cannot be deprived of no matter how grave their sins are. And that for us to live in a world where that right to life is truly given the pedestal that it deserves, the state must not have the right to execute people for the actions that they've committed. The state must not have the right to deprive people of the right to life. And finally, most people would just say it's a basic moral argument, regardless of all the previous points I just laid out. They say, look, you cannot kill a person, full stop. Any form of taking a person's life away is murder. And while you can find other ways to deal with crime, murdering people for it is too inhumane. It's a beastly thing to do and something the human species must no longer practice. So those are some of the points against the death penalty. In favor, we have many classic arguments as well. The first is that it can act as a deterrent towards more serious crimes, that people who are willing to commit certain crimes must be scared enough to believe that if they do go ahead with it, they will be executed by the law. Now here once again the statistics go both ways, right? Both sides are able to produce detailed numbers and figures for why the death penalty is either a strong deterrence or not a deterrent at all. But this is a central part of the pro-capital punishment debate nonetheless. And it's true that many countries with low crime rates do have the death penalty, although experts say that the correlation isn't as simplistic as that. Another argument is that some people are just not compatible with society and that therefore they must be eliminated. Serial killers, child rapists, leaders who've committed genocide, like let's say Hitler, many say that those types have forfeited their right to life because of the heinous things they've done. If Hitler had been alive after World War II, I think it's almost certain that most people around the world would have said he should be hanged for the murder of 6 million Jews. There's another argument that many people don't bring up, but which I think is important in the modern age, which is what do we do with enemies of the state like terrorists who are a liability even when they are prisoners? So, for instance, there was a famous hijacking called the Kandahar hijacking in 1999, where Indian Airlines 814 was hijacked by members of a terrorist group called the Jaish-e-Mohammed. And their major demand was that India release their leader, Maulana Masood Azhar, who had been captured by the Indians 5 years before that. The Indian government eventually released him in the negotiations in exchange for the lives of all the passengers. Years later, the same guy orchestrated the Mumbai 26/11 attacks in which nearly 200 people were killed. If they had just executed the guy without having him as a prisoner for years, it's entirely possible that the Mumbai attack and the Kandahar hijacking would have never happened. And in fact, when India did capture one of the terrorists from the Mumbai attacks, Ajmal Kasab, India executed him promptly instead of having him on as a prisoner like they usually do, because they knew that having him in a jail cell somewhere was only likely to spark yet another debate where some hijacking or kidnapping happens demanding for his release. So unfortunately, we might be faced with situations where some people represent national security threats even when they are imprisonment. So the death penalty might be what governments lean towards in those cases. Tell me where you stand in the comment section. Since 7 minutes is clearly, for a topic like this, it's an appetizer, right? It's not the main course at all. If you like content like this, as always, please don't forget to share and subscribe. Thank you, take care, and I'll see you soon.